Hello and welcome to The Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On this week's show, I'm speaking to Ela Lee, author of the debut novel Jaded. Now, I absolutely loved Jaded. I cried several times while reading it and found a sense of camaraderie, validation, and being seen that I didn't even know was missing. Ela writes a multi-layered story of her character Jade, who is British-Korean-Turkish. Having gone to a prestigious university, Jade is now a 20-something professional lawyer working in a law firm in London. One night, a devastating incident takes place that sparks a huge internal and external unravelling for Jade, and the novel explores themes of identity, privilege, race, patriarchy, corporate success, and so much more. Ela Lee is a London-based author. She studied law at the University of Oxford and previously practised as a city lawyer. During the pandemic, Ela decided to focus on her love of writing and began work on her debut novel Jaded that explores themes of consent, race, and identity. I'm so glad she's my guest today. Hello, Ela. Welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf podcast.
Thank you so
It's
much.
so lovely to have you here. How are you doing?
Good, really. It's cold and rainy, but it's good in here.
Oh, yeah, it's very grey here as well. But yeah, I am so honoured to have you on the show today to talk to you about your debut novel, Jaded, which just came out in February, I think. So it's a very new release.
Yeah,
And there's lots of buzz and lots of excitement about it. So huge congratulations on getting your debut novel out in the world. But before we get into the intricacies of your novel, I'm really interested in what your journey has been like to becoming a writer, because this is your debut, obviously. So what's your journey?
I had never written, I've always been like a big reader, and I was always that kid in school who was like reading all the time, but I'd never written anything until I started writing Jaded. So it was about 6 months into the pandemic, and I'd experienced quite a difficult start to my career, and kind of a bit of, not just myself, but all the women of colour I knew who were working in similar industries were just having a bit of a tough time with it. And the pandemic was the first time that I got the chance to really reflect on it and really slow down and sit with this sort of culmination of experiences that myself, my colleagues, and my friends had all experienced together. And yeah, it felt very overwhelming, and I needed somewhere for all of those feelings to go. And my partner was like, you should try writing about it. And I put it off for months, and I was just like, yeah, whatever, like, I'm not going to do that. And then one day, I'm not entirely sure what possessed me, but I just wrote that first chapter that is the work party chapter. And that chapter stayed pretty much the same throughout all drafts of the novel. And once I started it, I'd stop until the draft was finished. And then, yeah, it just all came out in this big tumble. And then about a month later, it was done. And then I spent a couple months editing it. And then I sent it out to agents a few months later. So it was very quick in that sense.
Yeah, that is very quick, because I know sometimes authors have been working on books for years, and obviously I guess maybe in the pandemic you were able to like hyper focus, which I guess some often isn't the case for aspiring writers anyway, and they're juggling so many different things. So it's nice to hear, and it's also actually it's nice to know that this is like a lockdown creation, but isn't inspired by lockdown, which is also nice, because I think there was a lot of stuff coming out after lockdown that was about lockdown, which felt a little bit, I don't know, I personally haven't been a huge favour of novels about lockdown. I don't really want to remember that time massively, and it's very confusing and conflicting. But yeah, just if you could just take a moment to introduce your novel, tell us what Jaded is about.
So Jaded centres around the main character Jade, who is a mixed race, something lawyer living and working in London, and she really has everything that she's ever worked for. She has this career that's on the rise. She is really motivated by making her parents happy, and she has this kind of ostensibly very stable and secure long-term relationship with her boyfriend Kit. And then, right at the start of the novel, in chapter one, something very life changing happens to her. And that kind of acts like the catalyst for her to pick apart this life that she's very actively created for herself and come to the realization that perhaps she's been playing a role for everyone else around her. And in doing so, has really suppressed herself and her needs. And I would say it's a late coming of age novel about sort of in messy relationships and kind of understanding where you sit in the world.
The character of Jade is mixed race. She is Korean and Turkish, but she's Britain, born in the UK, born and raised in London. You are also Korean Turkish, British-Korean-Turkish.
Yeah.
How much of the novel has been inspired by your real life? And like, where did you find, if any of it, but like, where did you find the line in borrowing from your own life and creating fiction?
Yeah, 100%. I think I really grappled. So I knew Jade, I wanted her to be mixed race from the very, very beginning. Because I don't think there are that many sort of mixed race characters in sort of contemporary fiction. And I went back and forth on what mix she could be. And I realized after changing it 3 or 4 times, an Irish writer writes Irish characters, or a Nigerian writer writes Nigerian characters usually. So it's like, why am I trying so hard to distance myself and my lived experience from this when other authors are never called into question for doing that themselves? I think about Shaggy Vane is set in Glasgow and all of these things. So I think I just was like, this is the experience that I know how to tell authentically. And for a book like Jaded that covers quite a lot of heavy themes, I felt like emotional authenticity was really important. And in terms of finding the line, that was the line for me, was emotional authenticity over factual authenticity. In terms of the actual events that happened to Jade, they haven't happened to me. The events of the book aren't biographical to me, but like I said, for these sort of really thorny subjects, I do think it's important for them to be emotionally real and emotionally raw. So that was how I differentiated between the two.
Absolutely. And the book is so emotionally raw. Like oh my God, I started reading it on the train. I live in Luton. I'm just going into London. It's like a 35-minute train ride, and my train was late, so I probably read for about 45 minutes. Maybe I got through 80 to 100 pages. By the time I had got to London, my eyes were puffy. I was like disheveled. I had cried about 5 times. I was like, what is going on with this book? Because it is like you capture the sort of confusion and the pain so well on such a multitude of layers. And I think I really appreciated that, because we see a character that is so well developed and we see so many different sides to her. And I just want to take this moment just to thank you and to congratulate you on that. And I have never read a book with a character that is Korean Turkish, and I never even felt that it was missing. But now that she's there, Jade's out there, I'm just like, where have you been my whole life? Like, why were you not on the shelves before?
I can't even express, because I think like when you're a writer, there are so many external ways in which you can seek. There's like sales, and then there's prizes, and then there's like press and all of that. But I actually think like having a reader say to you, this book resonated with me, is like the most important thing, and it's the most sort of amazing thing about writing a book. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And I'm not Korean Turkish, and I'm sure there are people that are. So for those, or even people that are Korean or people that are Turkish, to find that representation, I think also, I can't imagine for them. If I feel so moved, I can't imagine for them, like how affirming it is. I think even if I think increasingly, sometimes we look to representation for a full example, a full mirror of how I am living my life. But
Mhm.
I don't think really that's what we should aspire to. I think just in seeing similarity or seeing the very basis of your representation, there is real beauty in that.
Mm.
And that's not even like a political implications or like a social stance. Just it's very beautiful, I think, to
Mm.
see people that look like you and that have parents that look like your parents. I think there's real beauty in that, and that brings power with it too, for sure.
100%. I think I remember so distinctly the first book I read, a biracial character. It was actually not even fiction, it was a memoir. And I don't think I ever would have written Jaded if it wasn't for
Mm.
that initial representation, because I was just like, oh, like I just didn't think that these were things that other people were experiencing and were thinking of. And now that I've seen that it is, it's even subconsciously empowered me to then go on and think, oh, wow, this character might be someone that other people might like to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, where do we start? There's so much I want to talk about. But let's start with, so the opening scene of the book is, as you've described it, is a party that takes place, a work party that takes place.
Mhm.
And you, obviously Jade, the character of Jade is a lawyer working at like a top law firm in London. You provide us with such insight into the corporate world, into the corporate law world, and the ways in which women are ignored, and like how like men jump over us and we're not listened to, and just so much criticism of it. What were you particularly interested in bringing about, and what did you want to focus on and just shed light on?
It was really important to me that Jade had bodied the model minority. So she is everything that a model minority is expected to be, particularly in the workplace. She's extremely hardworking, she never complains, she goes above and beyond for everyone else, she's quite quiet, all of those things. And I think what I wanted to show was that the moment she started questioning the systems around her and actually asking them to protect her, all of that work and all the ways in which she has tried to contort herself to be accepted by this sort of industry and this institution just crumble away. And with the sort of diversity committee scenes and stuff, it's like the disconnect between the talk of diversity and inclusion and what's the word I'm looking for, like headcount and all of those things. There's a huge gap between saying those things and then actually acting on them and actually following through. And I really wanted to, across the sort of length of the book, show how that gap really is, and show, you can spend your whole life being exactly what a place like this asks you to be, but when you start trying to navigate it, when it's no longer on your side, they will pretty much revert back to protecting the poster boys of the institution.
Yeah. And I think there's scenes with the diversity committee. Oh my gosh, there was something very comical about them, which is because obviously I guess it was a little bit satirical, but very real. That is exactly how it happens, that diversity isn't taken seriously. It is very much about how you appear to be diverse and how you can claim that you are diverse without actually understanding that the reason why, actually, if you have real diversity, you have people where it matters, and you look at access and you look at barriers and you look at all the things that actually matter.
Mm.
And it was really refreshing to see that on a page, because I think as well that is the lived experience of so many people across so many sectors in public life.
Mm.
We have people talking about the fact that they want to have more women in senior leadership positions, but when it comes down to it, do very little to actually make it happen.
Mm.
And that's not even thinking about race. But what was interesting in that also was that, not in the diversity committee, but there was a female character who seemed to be giving Jade like a leg up, she was opening a door, and I was like, yes, this is women championing women. But as you said, like the moment that Jade was holding people to account and had turned to them for help, everyone closed in on her, including the woman.
Mm.
And I thought that was important to raise, but also really, really difficult to read, because you hope that at least Genevieve would have her back.
Yeah.
But she didn't. And I wondered if you could just speak to that a little bit as well, because I feel like it's really difficult for women to rise up in the corporate sector. But what is the experience for some of the women that actually do manage to do it? It seems as though they become even more entrenched in the system.
Yeah, I think the issue is that there seems to be this sort of binary between our view of sort of women interacting with each other in the workplace. Is women are pitted against each other and have this scarcity mindset and can't support each other, or the other end of the spectrum is, as a woman, you owe it to other women to pull up women who are under you and really champion them. But on both ends of the spectrum, you're putting a huge burden on women, more so than men. Either way, they can't really win. So you look at somebody like Genevieve, and as you said, she very much positions herself as like Jade's mentor. She very much goes out of her way to really help Jade achieve the career that she wants. And that is what you would hope that an older woman would do for you, in an older, very successful woman would do for you. But I just wanted to challenge the idea that everyone is expected to always act in the right way. And I think if we all would like to say, if we were in that position, we would stand with Jade and we would do all of these things to protect her. But actually, if we had spent 30 years really building a career and you're faced with losing like a major business partner over it, would we really? It's just this question of sort of human behavior and why we choose to put so much pressure on women to support other women, when actually the whole industry is so male dominated that actually the burden shouldn't lie with the sort of one woman at the top to help all women under her.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think that's very true, in the sense that either way, the pressure is on women rather than on the system, or rather than on men to rethink how they're doing things. And actually, if a woman gets to the top, what she's had to go through to get there is sometimes also forgotten. And actually, we see it with the way that Jade interacts with her colleagues as well, just the way that women shrink themselves around men and make themselves out to be less intelligent, or I'm just like hanging on to every word. And it feels really sad to think that we have to do that, when in essence, like, so many women are so brilliant and would be able to do a better job at the positions that men hold. Yeah, that's really, very interesting. So Jade herself is, as we've said, she's Korean and Turkish, British-Korean-Turkish, but her name is not actually Jade. Tell us a little bit about her name.
So her name is Jada, which is a Turkish name, but it's in Turkish, the letter C is pronounced like the letter Jade. So it's spelled Ceyda, but it's pronounced Jada. And that's her birth name. And then when she goes to school, she has so much trouble with people learning how to spell her name, that she anglicizes it to Jade. And she does the same thing with her surname. That line, all children of immigrants have a Starbucks name, was pretty much the first thing that I wrote for Jaded. And it's the one thing that I get the most messages and kind of comments on, because so many people do seem to still have a Starbucks name. But to me, there are so many ways in which children of immigrants mold themselves in order to assimilate into their host countries. And a lot of them are very large and a lot of those are very small. But I thought that the way in which Jada herself behind this anglicized name, and over the course of the book comes into her power and realizes, like, her own boyfriend doesn't actually realize that Jade isn't her real name. It was just such a tangible, sort of stark manifestation of all the small ways in which she's had to kind of mold herself into someone who is presentable for other people.
Absolutely. And I think the anglicizing your own name is it's actually a huge thing, although it sounds very small. And for Jada to have become Jade was like a very small tweak. But your name is one of the most integral things about you as a person. and it tells people so much. It tells the world so much about you. And if you change its spelling, or you change you change the variation of the letters, or you just change your name completely, you change in essence your identity.
Yeah.
And I don't think we give enough credit really to our names, because often we don't choose them ourselves, they're given to us by other people, but they hold so much weight and they have so much significance and history and power and importance. And especially I think for Dara, because she is mixed race, and it speaks to so much of her, where her family have come from, and the experiences of her parents and their stories. And I just think it's just so big, because I think there's
Huge.
so many ways in which like our names have changed over time, and how that conversation in telling somebody that they're saying your name wrong, just like how awkward and how difficult that is, especially as a child, when you don't really know what is okay to say to people, especially if it's like a teacher, like what is okay to tell someone about how wrong or right they are about how they're pronouncing your name.
Yeah. I remember in school, you go on these school trips, and this is so like 90s, early noughties, but there's like key rings that had everyone's name, and like never being able to find my name, and like my friends, most of my brown friends, sort of never being able to find their names either. Again, it's just such a small thing, but usually your name is a reflection of your culture. It's a reflection of where your parents came from and has a lot of history behind it. So masking that and covering that up behind just a name that you think will be easy for other people is just symbolic of all the other ways in which you mask your history and your culture and your food and your traditions to not stick out in any way, particularly as a child as well as when you're in school and stuff. I think it's even more, and it's actually quite scary from how young learn to do that and how young they learn to hide their lunchboxes and hide their. Everyone thought that my mum was my nanny because we didn't look, because she's not mixed race and I am. And like at school, all the teachers would be like, "Oh, your nanny's here."
Oh gosh.
So it's this very long-term erasure of who you are and where you came from.
Yeah. I can completely relate to those experiences. My name has been butchered massively over the years and has changed in like how it's received and how it's said. And I just remember feeling much like you, like I have never been able to find my name on a keyring or on a mug or anything. And I think as a child, like that's a really difficult experience. And I think actually that leads on to the next thing I want to talk about, which is the fact that Jade is a daughter of immigrants. And you capture in the book the complexity and the beauty and the pain and the richness, but also the gaps between children of immigrants and their parents. What were you most interested in bringing out about that experience and that dynamic between these two generations of people?
So yeah, I think daughters of immigrants, and more broadly children of immigrants, are in a very unique position because they are quite living in two different worlds generally. And the world at home and in the community that they grew up in versus the world that they tend to move into as they grow up and grow older, the gap between them gets a bit wider and wider. I had obviously seen a lot of very stereotypical depictions of immigrants being very strict on their parents and being very prescriptive about, strict on their children and being very prescriptive about what they can and can't do and like all these things. But that has never sat that well with me. It seems just a bit of a lazy trope in a way. So I really wanted to unpack that and delve into a family and really pick apart the expectations that they may have for their child, but all parents have expectations for their children, and give her parents the airtime to really explore why they are like that and explore all the things that have happened in their lives trickle down and result in what they want for their child. And when it comes to Jade, show that yes, her parents have expected a lot from her, but there are many ways in which she has erased them too, and many ways in which she hasn't perhaps respected where they've come from and respected or paid enough attention to why they are the way they are, and that push and pull between your family life and as you grow up and be an adult, particularly for daughters of immigrants, that sort of pull away from your family influence, I really wanted to pick apart.
Yeah, and I think what I felt the strongest connection with was how, in my experience, as I've grown up, I have moved like physically away from my parents, sometimes very far, other countries. But I think having, I don't know if it's like age and wisdom or space as well, to reflect on who they are and really think about where they're coming from, like physically where they came from and historically what they went through and what their ancestors went through and what the implications of that would have been, and to be able to then just come forward with more grace and forgiveness if needed and just patience, and then how that has impacted my relationship with my parents now. And I think that's a very common experience for people of our age and our generation, is coming to that level of understanding that we didn't have when we were younger, because I think so much of our childhood and our upbringing has been about surviving in this world where we feel like we don't belong here and we don't belong there, and trying to assimilate in many ways and be accepted and be respected and valued as who we are and seen as who we are. But what has come with that is self-erasure, is the way that we also allow the Starbucks people to write our names wrong and to take on those names, and we allow people to make jokes about us, and Jade goes through that. And I don't think we don't do it as a form of disrespect or anything. It's part of our own survival and our own trying to understand who we are and where we come from. And I think one of the the most heartbreaking things that you write in the book, one of the reasons why I cried on that train into London that day, was you said like Jade had this awful incident had happened to her, and she's come to realize what had happened because it had taken her some time to actually realize what had happened. And she's completely broken, and she goes to her parents, as we often do when we're devastated, we don't know what else to do. And she can't find the words to tell her parents what has happened. And she says in the book, she says, my parents have worked so hard to build this world for me, to build a space for me where I can thrive and I can be successful. How can I now tell them that the world that they have sacrificed so much for me to live in is the world that has hurt me so much? Oh my gosh, I was like, that is a dagger to my heart, because that is exactly the struggle, I think, in the way in which we feel like we can't complain, and we can't talk about the way that things are hurting us. On the one hand, because we know that our parents have done so much for us to even allow us and create space for us to thrive in this world. Like, you went to Oxford, I went to Cambridge, and so I know what my parents have done over the years to allow for that to happen and to create the environment for that to happen. It doesn't happen in isolation. And then the other side of it is like the comparison, right? We're living such a life of comfort and with so many privileges, and our parents didn't have that kind of life. Like, I know they've gone without food and all kinds of struggles. I just wondered if you could speak to that experience as well.
I think it's very tough, because I think there's an inherent, for Jade, and in my experience, there is a sort of inherent lack of communication, in that there has to be an understanding that your parents and your children difficulties in their own way. They're just very different. And that's another thing I wanted to explore, as you said, in that scene, where it's like, it's almost as if she has absorbed so much of what her parents have gone through and really taken that onto her shoulders. She says there is a responsibility to them to be happy. There is a responsibility to them to be successful. They have done so much to let that happen. And then you compare that with people who maybe haven't done that, and it's almost like a privilege to not have that sort of, to feel like you have to step in like a certain size of shoes and go on to be this, achieve all of these different markers of success. But it is tough, because for their generation, So my parents, I can only really speak for my family. My parents came to the UK, both they were well into adulthood and didn't have any family in the UK. They had me, and it wasn't easy for a lot of the times, and it wasn't, as you said, it was quite difficult. And I know that they worked extremely hard, as you say, for me to go to Oxford and for me to facilitate the conditions for me to get into somewhere like Oxford and really prioritize my education and things like that. And I accept that I would never have gone on to be a lawyer without that support, and I would never, as a result, have written Jaded without that support. But that doesn't mean that, as a mixed race person and a brown woman who is in a very white world, I went to uni 10 years ago. I'm sure it's different now, but I hope it's different now. But there was so much casual racism. Like, it was
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
rife. Like, people used to literally just say the most like barefaced racism just all the time. And it's a really difficult thing to feel like maybe you are being ungrateful for not being happy, fully 100% content in these environments, and feeling like maybe you can't complain because you may come across as not taking full advantage of the opportunities that are given to you. And it's a balancing act, and it's really, I think it's tough for a lot of children of immigrants who have gone to be quite successful but have found that success to be perhaps a little hollow or a little difficult to exist within, and understanding where to put that dissatisfaction and understanding how to process it without, while still paying homage to how much work our parents did for us. Sorry, that was really long-winded, but I'm hoping that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. It's that balancing act of having these two things exist at the same time. And I think like accepting that like they can exist at the same time, and it's okay if like there seems like a clash, but they do exist at the same time. And I don't know about your parents, but my parents will never accept that they put any sort of pressure on us to excel academically. They will be like, no, well, we didn't direct you towards certain career paths or whatever. They will never accept it. And whether or not they said the words directly, it's all the unspoken things that they do, and and all the things that they say that's not directly those things that create pressure. It's about understanding that it's not always clearly constantly standing over your head and telling you you must be a lawyer or you must go to. It's not. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about those kind of pressures. And so it is this world of not saying what you mean, and actually that it's all the unspoken things, which is the same with also some of the racism that everyday minds often are not spoken things. They're the way that people look at you, they're the way that they make assumptions about you, they're the way people just will not include you in things. And yeah, and some of it is very overt, of course. I have many stories, and I'm sure you do too. And it's just, yeah, as you said, I think it is this balancing act, and it is something that children of immigrants struggle with, I think, and a lot. And it's just nice to see it in a book and see it through the character of Jade, and just it reaffirms that you're not alone. And it, I think, gives just a little bit more space to process that.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
Uh,
That is
yeah.
much my aim.
Yeah. One of the other things you write about in the book is about privilege. And so there's the scene in the book where you're talking, or like you walk in, or I don't know if you walk in, there's like a debate happening between white men. Essentially, I think it's about Syria, or it's about something, some war that's happening in current affairs. I think it is Syria. And Jade reflects on actually on how privileged a person is to be able to talk about an issue intellectually and academically, and to not be moved by it emotionally due to lived experience.
Yeah.
And that has encapsulated so much of what I have been feeling, particularly very recently. And I think been feeling it for a long time, but very recently. and I have struggled to find the right words. And actually, I said something very similar to a friend of mine before reading it in the book. So when I read it, I gasped. I was like, "Oh my gosh, that is literally what I just said to my white friend very recently." Because often when we think about privilege or we talk about privilege, it's spoken about in terms of very material things. It's spoken about housing and wealth and jobs and whatnot. But actually, so much of privilege is based on what you have
Yeah.
experienced and how you feel and how that and then how also that impacts everything.
Mhm.
And it comes up in the book also when Jade's boyfriend goes to her family and he starts talking about North and South Korea, and Jade's mom is like, what? She's furious, and she's like, how does he not understand that this is our home? Why is he talking? Because he's like, oh, I read this article, and what's your stance on this?
Yeah.
And she's horrified.
Mhm.
But I absolutely love that scene because that is exactly what sometimes it feels like for me when people start talking about things in a way that feels so detached and so void of understanding the real impact on people.
Mhm.
How have you come to think about privilege? And where did that, yeah, like how have you come to think about it and that particular scene? Like, where has that all come from?
As you said, I went to Oxford. I did law at Oxford, and I'm sure this is the case for all other unis as well, but it's a place where people are very prone to debating things for the sake of debating them. And people are naturally argumentative and they want to play devil's advocate and they really want to pick apart everything that everyone else says. And I really struggled with that when I got there because a lot of these topics were very real and very raw. When I got there, it was Erdogan's rise to power in Turkey. Obviously, I'm Turkish and I've spent a lot of time in Turkey. And I would have these white men with signet rings and everything, talking over me and trying to like mansplain Turkish politics to me because they've read an article about it. And that memory is what sort of really drove that scene or those scenes of. And I remember being like, every time I would go into Turkish politics and what all these years of political instability have led to this enormous rise to power and blah, 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 I would always just be spoken over. And everyone would just be like, oh, you're just really emotional about it. And I'm like, but I am emotional about it because I know about it and I have real people who are affected by it. And I have grown up, my father has grown up in an era of huge political instability. My aunts, my cousins, they're all living it and breathing it as we currently have this debate. So I found that very jarring. And that is just one example, but there were lots of examples of sort of people, and I'm just going to be specific here, white people, using other people's real history and real trauma as a form intellectual enjoyment or a form of intellectual practice in a way. And I found very uncomfortable. It seemed to be more about the self and it seemed to be more about projecting what you know about something rather than a genuine to understand a situation. And I felt like there was a lot of privilege in that because there's a lot of privilege in being able to just objectively discuss something that is extremely painful and extremely traumatic for so many people and dismiss anyone who's emotional about it as just no longer being objective. So that conversation about Erdogan is what really drove me to write that scene.
Yeah, I remember when I went for my Cambridge interview, I was prepared. Like my teacher he had said to me, they might ask you really bizarre things, like they might ask you to defend a really like a horrific position, and he was like, just do it, like it was like, because they just want to test your thinking. Because like, they're just looking at like how you can take some piece of information and defend it from any angle and what you're thinking and then the arguments that you're forming. So he was like, it's fine, it's just going to be an exercise. And I was like, yeah, cool, like I didn't see anything wrong with it. But when I went to my interview, one of the questions I was asked was to defend the Iraq war.
Wow.
I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't even speak. Like I was just really bamboozled, and I like stumbled my way through an answer. And then, and actually, interestingly enough, like who then later became my director of studies, he was like, oh, your answer was actually really good. And I was like, I don't even remember what I said. And I just remember when I went back to school and I told my teacher, I was like, they asked me to defend the Iraq War. And he was like, how did you feel? I was like, disgusted, like just disgusted. Like I couldn't. And I felt like it didn't seem to me at the time, and especially not now, that was just like a by chance thing. I was sat there, a brown, visibly Muslim woman in a hijab. I felt like that was a very clear, like it was very targeted. And I feel like if I don't think about it in that way, that's very naive. But again, like I didn't have the words to talk about that experience and understand like where it fits in and all of those kind of things. But I just remember feeling, oh my gosh, if I get in, is this what it's going to be like? And so I avoided like debating societies and things, because I learned very quickly that wasn't going to be a place where I would feel comfortable and I would feel safe. And actually, I think recently as well, with everything going on in the world, and especially in Palestine, like I have been impacted by what's going on. Because I think when I really think about it, I know that it's not new. And I know that like people from my family's from Pakistan, my ancestors and my people and my community have also been impacted by partition, which was bloody and deadly and mass forced displacement. And people were killed on both sides of this enforced border, which is a very similar history to what happened in 1948 in Palestine and has happened historically around the world at time of decolonization. And to have that connection, I think really changes the way that I feel about the situation. But again, if I talk about it, I too am just told that I'm emotional and I'm like too emotional about it, but I also don't understand how I can't be. And I think that having the sort of connection, and that's like my personal lived experience, but also knowing that this isn't just me, like millions of people around the world are also feeling this connection from different parts of the world, Korea included, Turkey included. Yeah, it's really something else. And I think having that connection and feeling that pain is a different sort of pain to if you're looking at it objectively and thinking that it's so sad and that these images are so brutal. I think there is somewhat of a difference there. And just that sometimes I feel like I would like the validation just for people to understand that there is a difference. And so if there is more passion or there is more pain, to hold space for it.
I think it comes down to like empathy, right? Like it's like actually when I think about these very difficult conversations that I've had, but also recently as well, it comes down to stepping outside of your own view of something and understanding where someone else is coming from, which is what I was trying to capture in the book. Is it's not about you. It's not about you just trying to foist your opinion onto other people. It's about understanding that for other people it might be a lot more deep rooted and it might be intergenerational, it might be very historical, and that is a sort of heaviness that is carried through. And I think it's also a very run-of-the-mill form of delegitimizing and discrediting people is to say, oh, you're just emotional about it. I think it's a way that men discredit a lot of women, is just to say, oh, like you couldn't possibly, your opinion just loses all weight because you're emotional about it. When actually, if anything, somebody's emotions about something tend to align with a sort of wider history and a wider knowledge of something which has inspired those emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you're right. Like it's about stepping out of your own like your own shoes, but also you're like just putting down your also like your stereotypes and your like your agenda almost, and realizing that as you said, it's not just about you. Yeah, I really appreciated that, the way that you write about it in the book about privilege. It just, I think, will speak to so many people in being able to articulate some of that, because sometimes we experience things that they just feel so uncomfortable, and you don't know exactly why. Like, you can't pinpoint exactly what it is, or you don't have the words to describe exactly what it is. And I think this is one of those things that for so long we've been feeling uncomfortable about it. Why is it that a lot of the time on TV we have usually a lot of white people debating something that has nothing to do with them, religion or wars in Iraq or Syria, wherever it may be? Like, exactly why is that so harmful, and why is it so wrong and bad and annoying? And I think that representation and that presentation actually in Jaded is really brilliant. Let's go on and talk about Jade's relationship with her boyfriend Kit. Now, at the beginning of the novel, I was like, oh, he might be a good guy. He might be all right. I was very hopeful. And actually, you explore, because not only is there, are they of different races and backgrounds, but there's a class issue, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes on with them, which I also really appreciated, that looking at that intersection of race and class as well throughout the book. Why did you decide to have Jade in this very messy relationship with Kit, and where did his character come from?
His character was undoubtedly the hardest part to write, because I think it's actually quite easy to write men who are just villains, or men who are just out and out toxic and there's no redeeming quality about them. But what I really wanted to get at with Kit was that he genuinely believes that he is a feminist. He genuinely believes that he is an ally, and that doesn't see race, and that him and Jade are on totally equal footing throughout the course of their lives. And I wanted him to seem like he was genuinely trying to support her, even if he just wasn't doing it the right way. And I found that really hard, because when you're in Jade's head, it's very easy to just show all the negatives and just show all the ways in which she feels let down. But I really wanted to show the sort of push and pull, because Jade has spent 15, maybe even 20 years trying to be this person, the person that Kit would be with, the person that slots into someone like Kit's life perfectly. And so, in dismantling their relationship, she's also like totally dismantling her sense of self and her identity, and she perceives the shape of her life to be. And it was really important to me that Kit was like very charming, very good looking, very morally up, all of those things. Ultimately, when push comes to shove, he doesn't understand what she needs from him, and he doesn't actually see her. He doesn't actually understand who she is as a person. He sees what either she wants him to see, and also what he wants to see in her. And again, it was all kind of part of layering this sense for Jade of, she has no space to be who she really is. She has no, with her parents, in her job, in her relationship, she is just coming to this really horrifying realization that she has spent all of her life being what all of these things have needed from her. And ultimately, when she needs them, they can't hold space for her, and they can't hold space for all the different facets of her and what she needs. And I think her relationship is a huge part of that. And I think, again, second generation immigrants, it is quite common to be in interracial relationships. It's quite common to then date outside of your community, because the environment that you were raised in, and that's the environment that you then go on to live your life in. But then a lot of those interracial relationships are built on, if you as a second generation immigrant have spent so much time molding yourself to these environments, and then you date someone you find in that environment, how much of that, the person you're bringing to that relationship, how much of that is true? So yeah, I think the relationship with Kit was a real way of unpacking Jade's journey in who she's being, and how sad it is that after all this time, this person that she loves so much, and who he does love her, he just doesn't know her. So
Yeah.
it was really difficult for me to write.
Yeah, but I'm not surprised, because it's what I found really interesting was, as Jade's life was unraveling after what happened at the party, and her sense of self is completely dismantling, it's her relationship with Kit also is massively impacted. But it's not just that the relationship between them, he also seems to go completely like just rogue. And it just made me think that, is it that we're just seeing it now, or Jade is just seeing it now? Like, there's the scene at the party where they're singing that very inappropriate Coldplay song. It just made me think that, is it that because she is so much more heightened to it because of everything else she's going through, that it's almost as if the veil has been lifted, and up until now she has been turning a blind eye or not letting herself get impacted by so much. I don't think he became I don't really know if he became worse or if it's just that we were just seeing it.
Yeah, I think he has stayed basically the same. She has come into this awareness, this like newfound, she's awakened to all of these slight microaggressions that either he has said, like the North Korea comment around her family, or that he has allowed, that Coldplay scene where he has just failed to be a good partner to her and protect her in that circumstance. And again, I think this just goes back to what we were discussing earlier. We're trying so hard to create as little friction as possible and to create as little disruption as possible. So I remember like at uni and, you know, my very early relationships, just totally letting comments like that brush past me and just choosing to laugh along and choosing to just see it as a joke that maybe they just give the person the benefit of the doubt. It takes something as extreme as what happened to Jade for her to actually wake up to all of these things and realize, actually, I'm being mocked and I'm being othered constantly. And I think you're right. I don't think Kit and his friends have actually changed at all over the course of the book. It's just that Jade has changed and she is beginning to see all of these tiny cracks that have just built and built.
I just found it so interesting because, as you said, like it is common for people to be in mixed race relationships and to date people of all kinds of backgrounds, especially if you are really trying to be part of British society and you're around a lot of like white people that are of different races to you. And
I don't think it's
yeah.
Sorry, you go.
No, I was like, I don't think it's. I think what I appreciated was that you showed how complex it is and how difficult it is. And obviously, a kid is one person, so it's not like indicative of everybody, but just the different things that people experience and have to think about, and how, although in any mixed identity, in any mixed relationship, there is a lot of beauty and it's great, but really are both of these people seen and held and heard by the other person? It just, it's huge, I think.
I think it's a coincidence, and it was a very active choice that Jade is in a relationship with a white person and is attracted to white men, because again, it's another form of internalized erasure. It's a form of internalized racism to find yourself being attracted to the opposite of what you are and the person who is everything that you are trying to be, and aligning yourself into their world and ingratiating yourself into their existence. I think that is a very common experience. It's another thing that I really wanted to explore as well.
Yeah, we have been talking for over an hour. I still have questions, but I think we have to end, unfortunately, because I know that it has been so wonderful talking to you. Just before we go, what do you really hope for readers that pick up Jaded?
I try not to be prescriptive about it, because I think as a writer, you have to accept that everyone is coming to your book with a different context and with a different environment around them. And I don't think it's the author's place to say what you should take away from a book. But I think my hope would be that people feel validated to some extent and feel, you know, seen and held by Jade and her experiences, and perhaps just a heightened sense of empathy for her and for people like her, and seeing life through their lens, and understanding that it's just stepping into someone else's shoes, and hopefully that will inspire sort of a lot of empathy and a lot of learning about other people.
Yeah, I really hope so. It has been so wonderful speaking to you today, Ella. Thank you so much for your time.
You too. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media. I would really appreciate it if you could rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the show.